My mom said, "You can handle being flexible. Your brother is falling apart," after they stole my keys to move him into my house right after his divorce. So I told them, then he can handle living somewhere he actually owns. The first sign something was wrong was the new lock on my front door. The second sign was my brother Evan standing in my driveway with 3 suitcases, 2 moving boxes, and the kind of face that said he had already decided this was not open for discussion. I had been gone for 3 days on a work trip. I came home tired, sweaty, and annoyed because my flight had been delayed. I put my key in the lock and it did not fit. I remember standing there for a second, honestly thinking I had grabbed the wrong key ring. Then I saw the little pile of my old deadbolt hardware sitting in a trash bag by the porch. Then I saw my mother on my front step with a clipboard. Then I saw my father carrying a box through my living room window because the front door was open and propped with a brick. I did not even understand what I was seeing at first. My brain kept trying to turn it into something normal. Maybe they were doing repairs. Maybe Evan was only dropping something off. Maybe there had been an emergency and nobody had thought to call me. Then I saw my brother walk out of my house with my laundry basket in his hand. That was the moment my whole body went cold. I asked what was happening, and the answer was not good enough to even be called an answer. My mother acted like I was overreacting. My father acted like I should be grateful. Evan acted like he had already moved in and I was the inconvenience. I did not know yet that the stolen keys were only the first piece. I did not know yet that they had been planning this for weeks. I did not know yet that my family had been lying to me, to my face, while they used my house like it belonged to them. And I definitely did not know yet that my brother was not here just because his divorce was messy. He was here because the rest of them needed him hidden. I am 34 years old, and this still feels embarrassing to admit, but I had spent most of my life trying to be the easy one. Evan was the loud one, the dramatic one, the one who always needed something. I was the one who worked hard, paid on time, kept my head down, and got told that was nice. My parents liked to say I was independent like it was a compliment. What they really meant was that I was useful when they needed someone responsible, and invisible when they did not. The house was the first thing I had ever gotten that was just mine, not borrowed, not shared, not waiting to be reassigned to someone else. It had belonged to my great-aunt Ruth, who had no children and never trusted my parents much. When she died, she left the house to me, not to the family. Not to the boys, not to anyone else, just me. It was not a giant fancy place, but it had a little porch, a tiny yard, 3 bedrooms, and an old detached garage that I turned into a workroom. I had spent 6 years paying it off, fixing it up, and making it feel like a home. I had painted the kitchen myself. I had replaced the roof in the rain. I had cleaned out raccoon damage in the attic with my own hands. I had saved for every repair. It was the one thing in my life that had not been handed to Evan because he cried louder, which is probably why my family had always looked at it like a resource instead of a home. I should have seen that sooner. The first weird thing happened about 2 months before the lock change. My mother called and told me Evan was having a rough time after the divorce. She said his ex-wife had been cruel. She said the court process was draining him. She said the children were confused. She said he needed a stable place for a while so he could get back on his feet. I said I was sorry he was struggling. I said I hoped he figured things out. I said I was not in a position to host anyone. That should have been the end of it. Instead, my mother started bringing up how much room I had. She started talking about the house as if it were some extra space sitting unused, not a place I lived in every day. She said Evan would only need a little time. She said he could stay in the guest room. She said the children could come by on weekends. She said family should help family during a crisis. I told her no, not maybe later, not let me think about it. No, I had worked too hard to become a homeowner just to hand over my peace because my brother could not keep his marriage together. My mother did not take that well. For the next several weeks, she kept finding reasons to call. Some days she talked about how lonely Evan was. Some days she talked about how embarrassing divorce was for men in his position, which was rich coming from her because she had never found embarrassment to be a barrier when it was someone else paying for things. Some days she talked about how the children needed stability and how my house was perfect because the school district was better than theirs. I kept saying no. I said my house was not a revolving door. I said I was not their fallback plan. I said my brother was an adult and could make his own arrangements. Then the tone changed. My father got involved. He stopped asking and started hinting. He said Evan had sold a lot of his belongings to pay legal fees. He said the rental market was brutal. He said it would not kill me to be generous for once. He said I was acting like I owned a castle instead of a normal house. That last comment made me laugh, and then I realized he had no idea how insulting he sounded. I did own the house. That was the point. It was mine. And if they had forgotten that, then maybe they needed a reminder. I sent a group text saying no one was allowed to stay there without my permission. I included my mother, my father, and Evan. I made it clear that the answer was no and that I was not changing my mind. Nobody responded to that text. I thought that meant they had finally understood. That was my mistake. 2 weeks later, I left for the work trip. It was only 3 days. I had a project meeting in another city, and I had arranged for neighbor to check my mail and water the plants. I did not ask my parents for anything. I did not ask Evan for anything. I did not mention where I kept a spare key because there was no reason to. The spare key was in a lockbox hidden in the back of the garage, and only I had the code. At least that is what I thought. When I got back and found the changed lock, I knew immediately that someone had gone through my garage. The old deadbolt was not broken. It had been removed carefully. That meant someone had time. That meant someone had tools. That meant someone had planned this. I stood on my own porch with my suitcase by my feet and watched my mother act like I was the rude one for being confused. She told me to calm down. She told me Evan was in crisis. She told me I was making a scene. She told me this was temporary. I asked why my key did not work. She said they had to be practical. That was when I looked at my brother again and realized he was not carrying one bag and leaving. He had a bed frame box. He had kitchen supplies. He had children's toys. He had a rolling rack of clothes. He had a coffee maker. He had a stack of legal mail. He had enough stuff to tell me that this was not a visit. This was a takeover. I demanded to know who had changed the lock. My father said he had. He said it was safer that way. He said he had borrowed my spare key from the lockbox while I was gone and made another copy. He said that as if he were telling me he had borrowed a shovel. I was so angry I could barely breathe. I asked how he got into my garage. He said my mother had given him the code. I turned to look at her, and she had the nerve to look offended that I was staring at her like she had done something wrong. Then she said she had not given him the code. She said she had just let him borrow it. I remember that exact wording because it was so absurd I almost laughed. They had stolen my key code. They had made a copy. They had entered my garage. They had changed my front lock. They had moved my brother into my house without my consent, and they were speaking to me like I was the problem. I went straight to the garage and opened the side door. That is when I saw the second wave of damage. Half my workbench was gone. My important papers were stacked in a laundry basket. A box of my late Aunt Ruth's old photo albums had been moved to the floor, and one of the lids was bent. My camping gear was shoved behind Evan's boxes. There were takeout containers in my sink. There were muddy footprints in my hallway. There was a child's backpack on my dining room chair. That backpack should not have been there. No one had told me the kids were there. No one had told me they were staying over. No one had told me anything. I asked my mother where the children were. She said at their aunt's. That did not make me feel better. It made me feel worse because it meant they had not only moved my brother in. They had also been coordinating his access to the house like I was some absent landlord. I went into the kitchen and opened the trash can. Inside was a broken lockbox receipt and a handful of torn packing labels with my name on them. One of those labels had been on a box in my office. That was when I realized they had gone through my entire house, not just the rooms they needed. Everything. My stomach turned. I told them to get out. Nobody moved. My father asked where I thought they were supposed to go. My mother said I could not seriously expect Evan to be on the street when he was going through a divorce. I told her I expected him to be somewhere that was not my house. Evan finally opened his mouth and said this was not forever. He said I was making it bigger than it was. He said the kids needed a place to sleep when they visited. He said he had already explained to his lawyer that he was in between places. That was the first real crack in the story. I asked what lawyer. He looked at my mother. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at the floor. That was when I knew there was more going on than they wanted me to see. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I was too furious for that. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of everything. The new lock, the boxes, the suitcase, the child backpack, the footprints, the moved furniture, the trash with my labels in it. My mother tried to tell me I was being hostile. I told her to leave my property. She said she had nowhere to go. I told her that was not my problem. That was the first time she looked genuinely shocked. I think she had convinced herself that once they got my brother inside, I would cave because I always did the responsible thing. I did not cave. I told them all to leave before I called the police. That got a reaction. My father said I would not dare. My mother said I was overreacting to a family matter. Evan said I was embarrassing everyone. I called the non-emergency line anyway. That was not enough to make them leave, but it was enough to make them stop pretending they had the moral upper hand. While I was on hold, my father tried to explain that he had only changed the lock because I had not been available. That was a lie. I had responded to his text the day before. I had told him I was boarding my flight the next morning and would be back that evening on the third day. He had known exactly when I was returning. He had chosen that window on purpose. The police eventually sent an officer who was polite but clearly exhausted with family drama. I showed him the deed. I showed him my ID. I showed him the text messages saying no one had permission to stay there. I showed him the pictures I had taken. The officer asked if I wanted them removed. I said yes. My mother started crying right there on my porch, not real crying, the kind she used when she wanted an audience. She said I was humiliating my brother. She said the children would not understand. She said I was tearing the family apart over a room. I told her it was not a room. It was my house. The officer told them they had to go. That should have been the end of it. It was not, because leaving the house did not mean leaving my life alone. They went to my parents' house that night and they took my brother with them. I changed the locks again the next morning. I installed a camera at the front door and another at the garage. I also started checking every window latch, every drawer, and every cupboard because I did not trust what they had touched. That was when I discovered the first missing item. My desk drawer had been rifled through. My folder with property tax papers was gone. So was the file with my insurance policy and my emergency contact list. I called my insurance company and my bank immediately. Then I sat on the floor of my office and tried not to throw up. Because if my family had been digging through my paperwork, then this was not just about letting Evan sleep in a spare room. This was about access. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Evan's ex-wife. I knew it was her because she introduced herself in a blunt, awkward way and said she had found my number through a relative who had no business giving it out. She said she was sorry to bother me. She said she did not know who else to warn. She said Evan had been telling people he lived at my house already and that he had lived there before the separation. She said he was using my address on court paperwork. I remember sitting very still when I read that, because now there was a new problem. Not only had they moved him in, they had apparently been building a legal lie around the move. I called her back, not because I wanted drama, because I needed the truth. She was tired and angry and sounded like she had been fighting for months. She told me Evan had not just had a bad divorce. He had drained their savings account before she filed. He had hidden credit card debt in his name and hers. He had been caught lying about where money went. He had started trying to show a stable living situation as soon as custody talks began. My house was part of that lie. My house was supposed to make him look settled. That was the part that made me feel sick, because suddenly the family pressure made sense. My parents had not been trying to help Evan because they were tender-hearted. They had been trying to help him because he needed a place that made him look stable to a judge, and they thought my house was the easiest way to manufacture that stability. I asked her if she knew they had used my property without my consent. She said she had suspected it because Evan had mentioned a spare key and a family understanding. Then she told me something else. She told me my mother had contacted her weeks earlier to suggest that I was happy to let Evan stay if it would help the children. That hit me harder than I expected, because my mother had not just lied to me. She had lied to someone outside the family in order to build a story around my supposed agreement. That meant she had been thinking about this long before they changed the lock. I spent that night checking every document I had. I found a pattern. Any time Evan had a crisis in the past, my parents had somehow turned my resources into a support system for him. When his car died, they convinced me to sell him my old one at a discount. When he lost a job, they asked me to float his utility bill. When his first business failed, they said I should let him use my garage for storage. I had done it all because I had been raised to believe saying no made me selfish. The house was just the biggest version of the same old trick. The next morning, I went to my parents' house. I did not go to fight. I went because I wanted to know exactly how deep this went. My father answered the door and looked annoyed to see me. My mother acted like I was there to apologize. The mood in the house was awful. Evan was sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop and a mountain of paper. There were legal documents everywhere. My stomach dropped when I saw my property tax file on the table beside him. I asked why my paperwork was in their house. My mother said they were only trying to help organize things. I asked why Evan had my address on his custody filing. That one landed harder. Nobody answered right away. That silence told me everything. Then my father said it was temporary. He said it was only until Evan got settled. I asked why a temporary housing arrangement needed my house address on legal forms. He said it made things easier. I asked easier for who? He did not answer. Evan finally admitted in the most miserable, evasive way possible that his lawyer thought a stable residence would help his case. He said he was not trying to hurt me. He said he had no bad intentions. He said the children came first. And there it was, the family shield. The children, anything awful could be made noble if the children were mentioned quickly enough. I asked where the lawyer was getting the address from if I had never agreed to anything. Evan said he had not thought it mattered because I had been staying there before and after work trips. That was such a stupid lie that I knew he was desperate. I lived there full time. I had never spent a night anywhere else unless I was traveling. He knew that. My parents knew that. They were hoping I would be too rattled to correct him. I was not. I asked to see the paperwork. My father said I did not need to see it. That was when I realized they had not just used my house. They had probably put my name in places they had no right to. I told them I was taking the forms to an attorney. My mother said that would ruin everything. I said that was the first honest thing she had said all week. Then I picked up the stack from the table. My father tried to stop me. I moved my arm away. He did not touch me, but he got close enough that I could feel the threat in the room. My mother started crying again. She said Evan had no other options. She said I had always been the strong one. She said this was the one time I could be helpful. That sentence still makes me furious when I think about it. Being strong was apparently my punishment. Being responsible was apparently a family tax. I told her that my strength was not a resource for her to spend. Then I left with the papers. I took them straight to a lawyer. The lawyer was not dramatic about it, which somehow made it scarier. She went through the documents line by line. She pointed out the address changes. She pointed out a utility account transfer request that had a signature on it that was not mine. She pointed out that somebody had used a scanned copy of my identification to complete a lease verification form. That was the second big revelation. They had not only stolen my key, they had stolen enough information from my home to impersonate me on paperwork. I felt physically sick. The lawyer told me to preserve everything. She told me to file a formal notice against any unauthorized occupancy. She told me to send a written trespass notice. She told me to stop talking to my family except in writing. Then she asked a question that I had not been brave enough to ask myself. She asked whether my parents had ever had access to my important documents before. I thought about the last 2 years. The answer was yes. They had visited when I was not home. They had watered plants. They had picked up mail. They had once stayed the weekend while I was out of town because my furnace was being replaced. I had trusted them. I had let them in. That was how easy it had been. I wanted to scream at myself for being so naive, but anger at myself felt safer than anger at them. Because if I fully admitted what they had done, then I would have to admit that they had been willing to cross any line once they thought the outcome was for Evan. I sent the written notice that afternoon. I also sent a message saying any future entry would be considered trespassing. My mother replied by calling me ungrateful. My father replied by saying I was threatening family. Evan did not reply at all. That silence bothered me more than their anger. He knew enough legal language to be useful. He knew enough to understand what he had done. That meant he had accepted the risk. The next few days were a blur of locks, copies, evidence folders, and constant checking of the camera feed. Then the cameras caught my brother coming to my house while I was at work. He was not inside long. He tried the lock. He looked around. He left when he realized the new deadbolt was not the same one. The footage showed him carrying a bag of something small and rectangular. I thought maybe he was taking a package. I was wrong. The package had been sitting on my porch from an online order. The bag he was carrying was empty when he left. I checked the footage twice before I saw that he had come back after dark and tampered with my porch planter where I kept spare mail for recycling. He had been looking for the old garage code card. That was the third revelation. My mother had not only given him the garage code, she had also told him where I kept backup access notes. I found the torn card the next morning under a loose brick by the side path. It was soaked from rain. There was no possible innocent explanation. At that point, I stopped hoping for misunderstanding. I started documenting everything like a case file. Then came the text from my Aunt Linda. She was my mother's older sister, and she had always been the family member who saw more than she said. She asked if I was safe. She asked if I knew what had been happening. She asked if I had seen the estate folder from when Aunt Ruth died. That made my heart pound. I had seen the folder years ago, but I had not looked through every page. I called her immediately. She told me she had heard from my mother that I was being difficult about helping Evan. She said she did not believe the version she was given, so she had gone to check the old probate papers herself. What she found changed everything. Aunt Ruth had not left the house to the family generally. She had left it to me specifically because she had seen how my parents treated us. There was even a letter tucked in the probate records. Not a dramatic will contest letter. A private note. Aunt Linda read it to me over the phone, because I was too shaky to open the scanned file myself. In it, Aunt Ruth said she wanted the house to stay with the one person in the family who respected boundaries. She said she was not worried about me because I knew how to build a life without taking from others. She said my parents had always confused need with entitlement. She said Evan would one day try to lean on whatever was easiest. She said I should protect the house from anyone who treated it like family property instead of my home. I sat on the floor of my kitchen and cried so hard I could not breathe. Not because the note was sentimental, because it meant Aunt Ruth had known. She had seen the same pattern. She had trusted me with a warning, and I had spent years ignoring the scale of it. Aunt Linda said she had always suspected my parents hated that Ruth left the house to me. She said they had talked for years like it was only a matter of time before the place became family resource again. She said that was probably why they had gotten so bold with Evan. They had probably decided the will did not matter as much as their version of fairness. That was the fourth revelation. My family had been treating my home like a temporary inconvenience since the day it became mine. The note from Ruth made me angrier than I had ever been, not just for myself, for her, for all the times she had probably seen this coming and not been able to stop it. I forwarded the note to my lawyer. That same week, I learned that Evan had tried to list my house as his mailing address with his custody mediator. He had also given the school district my street address, even though he had never stayed there a single legal night under my permission. My lawyer told me this mattered because it showed intent. My parents had not just broken into my house. They had helped build a false story around it. I got a formal notice from the school district asking to verify occupancy because the address change triggered a review. That was when the panic in the family got worse. My mother called 3 times in one evening. I did not answer. She left a voicemail blaming me for making things hard on the children. My father sent a long message saying I was destroying my brother's chances. Evan sent nothing again. That silence stayed with me. A week later, I found out why. His ex-wife sent me copies of filings she had received through her attorney. The house had been listed in multiple places, not just as a mailing address, as a place of residence, as a place where he allegedly had his own room, as a place where the children allegedly stayed regularly. It was all false. The filings were not only embarrassing, they were dangerous for him. If the court caught it, it would look like he was lying to gain advantage. And if someone investigated who helped him with the false address, the trail led straight back to my parents. That was the 5th revelation. My parents had not only gone behind my back, they had potentially helped their son commit fraud. I started to understand the whole shape of it. They had not needed my house because Evan had nowhere else to go. They had needed my house because it was the cleanest story. I was single. I was stable. I had a paid-off place. I was the one they assumed would not fight too hard, and if they could get Evan into my house, they could sell the story that he was rebuilding his life under my support. It was disgusting, but it was also very them. The more I looked back, the more every old family moment started to look staged. They had always celebrated Evan's chaos as charm. They had always treated my independence like a selfish act. Every holiday had been one more reminder that I was the dependable one, which apparently meant I was also the disposable one. I had no idea how far they were willing to take it until my bank called about a suspicious account inquiry. Someone had tried to verify a home equity line on my property. I do not have a home equity line. I never applied for one. My bank locked everything down and sent me a fraud alert. That was the moment my hands started shaking, because now it was not just theft of space or theft of privacy. It was theft of identity. I went back through every document I had and found a copy of my utility bill missing from the office folder. I found an envelope I had not opened from the county records office because I assumed it was junk mail. It was not junk mail. It was a notice about a recent request for property documentation. I took it to my lawyer the next morning. She looked at it, looked at me, and told me that somebody had definitely been trying to use my property records for some kind of financial move. She could not prove exactly what yet, but the intent was enough to scare her. She told me to place a freeze on my credit reports. She told me to check for any unauthorized changes with the county. She told me to assume my family had access to more than they admitted. That was the 6th revelation, and it made the whole thing feel much uglier. My parents had not just shoved my brother into my house. They might have been trying to leverage the house itself. The county clerk was more helpful than I expected. There had been no title transfer, thank God, but there had been a records request from a third party tied to a local loan office. The name on the request was not mine. It was my father's old business contact. The last name was familiar enough that I remembered him from when I was a kid. He had done side accounting work for family friends and had always seemed oily to me, like the type of man who would sign something if the numbers looked friendly enough. My lawyer told me not to assume anything yet. Still, it gave me a direction. I called a friend who works in insurance and asked him to help me understand what a fraudulent occupancy claim could be used for. He said it could support utilities, mail, lending, residency, court stability, and even claims of shared assets in some situations. That was enough to make me feel cold all over, because if my family had really planned this, it was not a desperate move. It was an assembled one piece at a time. The key, the lock, the mail, the papers, the false address, the legal narrative, the financial angle. They had been building a case around my house while I thought I was just arguing about a spare bedroom. I showed the lawyer everything I had. She sent cease and desist notices. She drafted a formal trespass warning. She prepared a statement for the court about unauthorized use of my property address. Then she told me to brace myself because my family was likely to escalate before they backed down. She was right. My mother showed up at my office. I did not know she was coming until the receptionist called me. I refused to go downstairs. She left after 20 minutes, but not before telling the receptionist, and apparently half the front lobby, that I was punishing my brother during his divorce. That afternoon, a cousin I had not spoken to in months sent me a message asking why I was being so cruel. That was when I realized my parents had started the smear campaign. They were telling anyone who would listen that I was refusing basic family help. They left out the stolen keys. They left out the false papers. They left out the trespassing. They left out the fraud. They just said I would not help my brother when he was in crisis. I almost laughed. Instead, I sent my cousin one photo of the changed lock, one photo of the moving boxes, and one screenshot of the text where I had said no weeks earlier. She never replied. I did not care. What mattered was that the family rumor machine had started, which meant my parents were scared. A scared liar is a sloppy liar. Sure enough, another slip came a few days later. My father accidentally sent me an email meant for someone else. It was only 2 lines long, but it was enough. It mentioned cleaning up the housing situation before the next custody check. It mentioned keeping everything under one roof for consistency, under one roof. He had not meant my roof. He had meant the plan. That was the 7th revelation. They had been expecting this to become a long-term arrangement, not a temporary emergency, not a few weeks. A strategy. I sat staring at that email for a long time before I forwarded it to my lawyer. She later told me it was one of the more useful accidental admissions she had seen in a case like this. That was one of the few moments I almost smiled. Not because anything was funny, because for once my father had been stupid enough to put the truth in writing. The following week, I finally got the meeting notice from the family court side through my lawyer's contact network. Evan had tried to present his housing stability as a factor in custody mediation. He was now being asked to substantiate residence. He could not legally, not honestly. And because my attorney had already filed notice that he had no permission to reside there, the lie was collapsing. That should have been the end of it, but then my mother made it worse. She showed up at my house when I was not home and tried to get in with an old copied key. The camera caught her on the porch, rattling the lock, looking around, then walking to the side gate and peeking into the backyard. She was not there to apologize. She was checking whether I had installed more security. When I saw the footage, I felt a flash of panic so strong I could barely think. Then I felt something else. I felt done. I sent the video to my lawyer. She had already warned them in writing, so this time the police took it more seriously. My mother was served with a trespass warning at my parents' house. For the first time, there were real consequences she could not cry her way out of. That night, Evan came over to my house alone. He did not try to break in. He stood on the porch and waited while I watched him on the camera from inside. I did not open the door. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, and for one brief second I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the legal papers. I remembered the false address. I remembered the moving boxes and the stolen files. I remembered my parents using my home like a tool. He left a folded note taped under the porch mat. I did not open it right away. I handed it to my lawyer first. It turned out to be a pathetic mix of apology and self-pity with enough vague language to suggest he still thought he might talk his way out of accountability later. He admitted he knew the house was mine. He admitted my parents had helped him set up the move. He admitted he had not expected me to fight this hard. That last part mattered. They really had expected me to fold. They had expected me to be sad, embarrassed, and easier to manipulate than law enforcement and paperwork. Instead, I had become a problem. That was not the same thing as strength, exactly. It was just the point where being treated badly becomes impossible to ignore. The court side got messy after that. The custody mediator wanted clarification on residence. The ex-wife submitted the corrected information. The school district wanted the address verified. The loan inquiry got flagged, and my lawyer very quietly and very professionally started asking whether my parents had been making any unauthorized financial attempts tied to my property. That was when I learned one more thing. The loan office contact my father had used was not random. He had been helping Evan refinance debt, not in a responsible way, in a desperate one. They had been trying to use the appearance of residence to support a bigger financial plan that would have put more stress on my property records and possibly tied my house into a private loan arrangement for Evan. I did not have every detail yet, but I had enough to know the whole thing was bigger than my mother barging into my house. It was becoming a money trail. My lawyer told me not to speculate out loud. She said the paper trail would tell the story eventually. The only thing I needed to do was keep saying no and keep documenting everything. That was harder than it sounds when your own mother keeps telling other relatives you are heartless. But I did it. I went to work. I went to therapy because I finally could not stand the sound of my own thoughts anymore. I slept badly. I checked the cameras. I updated the lawyer. I checked the locks again. I stopped answering family calls unless they were in writing. Then the final blow came from someplace I did not expect. Aunt Linda called me and said she had found something in Ruth's old cabinet. It was a second note, not as formal as the first, more like a private warning. In it, Ruth said that if my parents ever got access to the house after she was gone, they would try to make it everyone's safe place except mine. She said the family had a habit of turning my generosity into obligation. She said they would call it helping. She said I would have to learn that family love without boundaries is just theft with better branding. That line hit me so hard I had to sit down. It explained everything with painful simplicity. That was the 8th revelation, and it made me feel less crazy. I was not imagining the pattern. My aunt had seen it too. She had left me the house not just as a gift, but as protection. By then, the legal situation had become serious enough that my father finally panicked. He tried to call me from his business line. I ignored it. He left a message through my lawyer saying they had only been trying to keep Evan afloat. That phrase made my skin crawl. Keep him afloat with my house. Keep him afloat with my privacy. Keep him afloat with my security. Keep him afloat with my name. No, I did not answer. Instead, I let the lawyer handle it. The lawyer sent a demand for immediate removal of all property, cancellation of any false residency claims, and a written acknowledgement that no one had permission to use my address or enter my home. My parents refused to sign at first. That refusal was stupid, because their refusal kept the paper trail alive, and the paper trail was exactly what I needed. A week later, the court side came back with a notice that Evan had been asked to provide proof of residence and could not. His ex-wife's attorney had challenged the address. The school district had flagged the custody records. The whole house of cards started to wobble. Then Evan cracked. He told my lawyer through his own attorney that he had only used my address because my parents said it was fine. That was the first time he openly placed the blame where it belonged. My parents had encouraged the lie. He had accepted it. Nobody came out clean. But I was not the one standing to lose custody or face fraud questions, so I was prepared to let them rot in the mess they had made for themselves. The family fallout was immediate. My mother tried to call me from different numbers. I blocked them. My father sent a guilt-filled email about being disappointed in the person I had become. I forwarded it to my lawyer and ignored the rest. Evan showed up one last time and asked for a civil conversation through a text message from a number I had not saved. I did not meet him. I told him in writing that any future contact should go through attorneys. That was the last personal message I sent any of them. Then came the part I had secretly been waiting for. The county records office completed its review. No title changes had gone through. No one had gotten near the deed. No lender had touched the house. My property was safe, but the attempts were documented. The false requests, the copied papers, the address changes, the unauthorized access, all of it was in the record now. My lawyer said that was important because if my parents ever tried anything like this again, they would already have a history. That history would matter. More than they deserved, honestly. About 2 months after the first lock was changed, the final court-related fallout hit. Evan lost his custody advantage from the stable housing lie, not because I wanted him to lose time with his kids, but because he had built the claim on false information. His ex-wife did not let it go. She pushed on every inconsistency. The court did not like the address games, and because his whole family had tried to support the lie, they all ended up looking worse. My mother was furious. My father acted like the whole thing had somehow spiraled beyond their control. It had not. It had just become too visible to hide. Evan eventually moved into a short-term rental, not because he suddenly became responsible, because nobody would let him use my house anymore. My parents tried one last pressure campaign. They invited me to dinner and acted like nothing had happened. I did not go. They sent a family text saying the drama was hurting everyone. I replied once in writing that the only drama I cared about was the one they created when they stole my keys and tried to move another adult into my home without permission. After that, they stopped pretending, which was almost a relief. At least the lies got shorter. The aftermath was not clean. My mother did not apologize. My father only apologized in the vague way people do when they want the consequences to stop more than they want to understand what they did. Evan sent 2 messages that were clearly intended to sound remorseful but still managed to center his own stress. None of that was enough for me. I did not need them to finally admit I was right in order to be free of them. I just needed access to stop. I changed my routines. I upgraded the security system. I made sure no one in my family had a spare key, a code, a backup, or access to any of my documents. I even changed the filing cabinet lock. It sounds paranoid now when I say it out loud, but after what happened, paranoia felt a lot like common sense. A few months later, Aunt Linda mailed me the original note from Ruth in a protective sleeve. I framed it, Not because I wanted a reminder of the betrayal, but because I wanted a reminder that somebody in my family had seen me clearly enough to protect me when I was younger and quieter and more willing to comply. That note sits in my office now. Every time I look at it, I remember that the house was never the real fight. The real fight was whether I was allowed to belong to myself. My parents had spent years acting like my life was just the place where other people recovered. My brother had spent years assuming he could take the easiest path and have someone else absorb the cost. They all learned the same thing at once. I was done absorbing it. The house is quiet again. The front door lock works the way it should. The garage code is mine alone. The documents are safe. The cameras still run, even though nobody has touched them in months. My family still tells their version of the story to anyone who will listen, but fewer people believe it now. Too many things went on record. Too many lies got written down. Too many people saw the pattern. I am still sad sometimes, not in the dramatic way people imagine, just in the tired way you feel after realizing your family would rather take from you than protect you. That part does not fully go away, but the rage has settled into something more useful. Clarity. I know now that being the responsible one does not mean being the one who gets sacrificed. I know that love without respect is just another kind of theft. And I know that the next time anyone in my family tries to hand my life to my brother as a solution, the answer will be no before they finish the sentence.